Welcome back, everybody, to Satisfactionist Live. I'm your host, Ben Olmos. Of course, you guys know that by now. You're tuning in. Thanks for checking this out. We're going to have another wonderful event today because joining me once again is a favorite of our little show that we put on here. It is Lisa Fay. Lisa, how are you?
I am awesome. How are you?
I'm doing really well, very well.
Good.
We were going back and forth before we got started here because I was sharing with you that one of the things I'm always trying to do is improve the production quality of what we do, and I bought some lights, some studio lights for my little in-home studio here. And hope they're coming through okay. I am noticing this weird shadowing going on underneath the hat. Probably not a good idea. My friend David would say, don't wear a hat or get better lighting. But these are things that you learn and you try and get better at. And as a one-man operation, these are just what you come up with. So, but Lisa, it is. I know before you were in a couple different spots, so good to see that you are back where you belong.
I'm home. I'm home. There's no place like home.
Which is wonderful, and a good place to have this conversation that we are going to be getting into tonight, which is we are going to be talking about communication, and this is one of those topics that I think is really important for anybody of any age. But what is most interesting in the environment that we are in today, which is unusual for many reasons, not just COVID, but it's also unusual because we have generations in the workforce these days. People who were born anywhere from the 1940s, maybe even the 1930s, all the way to, 1990s, turn of the century, 2000s. And there's a lot of things that have happened in that span of time. Everything from literally people went from outhouses to, being in space and landing on the moon. It just an incredible amount of things have happened. And from that, too, so many different ways in which we communicate and say things and talk to each other. And we're in an era right now where it seems, for many, there's a lot of sensitivities to the things we say. We sometimes ignore those generational spans that have influenced the way that we speak and communicate. And so, Lisa, I know for you, you deal a lot with this topic, not just from a speaker standpoint, but from a standpoint of how you work with and communicate with others, because you also do a lot of training seminars and things like that. So you're working with people of all ages all the time.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the things that you see from that standpoint of communication, and where are some of the challenges maybe that you've come across in your own experience?
So I'll try to attack that in a couple of different ways. One is when I'm looking from an employer standpoint. You and I worked together at Coke, and I got to the pleasure of being able to hire lots of people over time. And one of my jobs, I was, giving people a lot of times their first or second job out of college. And one of the things I noticed with my managers who they were working for is that they did not have basic reading, writing, and math skills.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed when I was looking at how my managers were spending their time, they were helping people rewrite stuff and trying to learn what you and I would, of our age, would consider basic math stuff. And one of the things we instituted for a while, and it was quite controversial, was a math test and a writing test. So back in the days when I got hired at the Coca-Cola company, there was this thing called the assessment center. and you had to go through some role plays, and you had to finish a math test, and it was so hard. At the end of the day, it took all day long. We were all pretty sure none of us would have jobs. Because at the end of the day, they debriefed you on what they were looking for, and you're like, I didn't do that, well, I didn't do that, and I didn't do that. Well, I brought back a kind of a mini part of that when I was a sales leader on the West Coast. And and I'll focus on the communication part. We had people simulate a sales call, and then we sent them to the computer and said, write a follow-up email like you would write to a customer.
Right.
And it was not about being technically correct. It was saying about how well they could communicate in a written form. And a lot of them just really struggled with that. How to have clarity, how to have the right word choice, how the words were spelled correctly. What is business language you would use as opposed to the language I would use on a Saturday night with my friends. So that was really, for me, the beginning of my real ahas about how education has changed, what people are learning has changed, and how their communication skills have changed with technology. I mean, I remember the bag cell phone, and I remember the first time we got Blackberries. I remember that thing called a pager. And now, it's funny. I mean, some of the texts, I just don't know, like all of the little language, what do the little letters mean? And we all have, different stories about, the first time we heard different terms and acronyms, and it's like, what does that mean? LOL, or, your grandmother, on the
WTF.
phone. Yeah, right. What is all that? But I've also noticed it with my nephews, because they spend probably not as much time as a lot of kids do, because my sister does do a good job of managing it. But when I get them on the phone, and I know that's something you learn over time. We grew up, talking on the phone. So you had that long telephone cord where I would get in the other room behind another door, and the cord would stretch, and I could talk on the phone like many kids for hours. And now, heaven forbid, you have to actually talk to someone on the phone.
Right.
And I think because we don't talk on the phone, in many ways, if we get out of our familiar territory of just the friends we have all the time, where there's like no pressure, talking to them, because we all have the same shared context. When you get them out of that, they really struggle with how to have that volley, I call it, of I talk and you talk, and then we talk about the same things, and then you change direction, and then you come back. I mean, a beautiful conversation is a bit of a dance.
Yeah, absolutely. and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I don't see them learning how to dance.
No, very true. And more, I think what is happening is that you get folks who they all want to be heard, but nobody wants to listen.
Oh,
So everybody has an opinion and everybody wants to say something, but they won't take pause and take in what somebody else is saying. They're and then sometimes, as I like to say, they're listening, but they don't hear you.
right. Well, I mean, if you think about how they consume a lot of information today, it's via their iPad, their computer, the text on the phone. And once you get into that world of computer land, one of the things that it does is it only provides you with information that reinforces your existing thought process or point of view. I did some work on my house. So I was looking at a new duvet cover. Now my feed is flooded with duvet covers. If I liked a particular candidate during the election, the stuff would be flooded with things that are about that candidate.
Or actually, initially I was getting a lot of that, and then I got a lot of from the other side too. So I think, from a social media standpoint, they figured out how to interrupt each other's feeds.
You're probably right.
But
But if I extend that to things I think about or things I'm trying to formulate a point of view on, I remember back in the old days, there was debate. And in debate, you had to be able to speak and articulate for an influence for your side, no matter what side you were given. And I know very few people anymore that could take the other side and be able to articulate it well and defend it.
right, yeah, because there's a lot of passion around the things that we are so interested in that we're blocking out that contrast of conversation that comes from the other side. And I think that's one of the things, when uh, one of the things I learned in academia, not only from the standpoint of writing a paper in third person, which I think is really important to kind of understand how to contrast your thinking so that there's a bit of impartiality to it. Um, but when I moved onto my PhD, one of the things that you really learn and kind of gets beat in your head is you don't know anything until you've done the research.
Yep,
and, and there's nothing like that to really kind of train your brain into thinking that, have you really, before you go out there and feel this way, have you really thought through all the variables and possibilities, and are you really read up on this enough to say something? And I will say that it that alone really changes the way that you put your thoughts and opinions out there in one of two ways. One, you either are a little hesitant to come out of the gate with a strong opinion because you don't know everything, but when you do have an opinion about something, you're very passionate about it because you've
yep,
read, and I always tell people like if I'm telling you like this is the way it is, it's not because I'm just guessing. It's because I've kind of done the research. I've like it's just kind of trained in you now to do that. But
absolutely.
we don't have uh, I'm trying to remember which of the philosophers that this came from, but it used to be that when you taught, um, and I'm going to give it to Socrates because there's this thing called the Socratic Method when you
The
teach,
Socratic method, yes, that's exactly where I was going.
where you ask open-ended questions in an effort to understand whether or not what you're stating is correct, and so you try and draw some. You're not leading with the fact that you're right. You're leading with the understanding that you could be wrong. And it
Mm.
seems today that when I teach, students have an opinion about something, and their opinion is so strong and unwavering that you're wrong until you can convince them that you have the respect, authority, or knowledge to demonstrate that they're incorrect.
And there are so many different sources you can use, some of which are good and valid, and some of which are not. Everybody can also point to a source typically that reinforces their point of view.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
the other confusing thing, I think.
the number of times that folks have said, you know, it's a study, or here's research that says, and I go through it, and it's not research. It's a metadata analysis, which is not research. That's just taking a lot of different things that have been written and drawing your own conclusion to it. Research is actually analyzing data, collecting data, looking at the information. But people don't have a really firm understanding of the difference between those two things.
I agree. And I think the other thing that we lose too is the fact that even if we are on opposite sides, there are a couple of things. One, there probably is some common ground we can agree on.
Yeah, absolutely.
We forget about how to find that. Secondly, I don't allow myself to listen and understand your space well enough to identify, wow, there's a great idea buried in there. I don't have to take the whole thing that you have to be able to pull the piece of it that really could be the thing, or that's the linchpin to take us to the next level. So we miss that creativity and even more so collaboration.
Yeah, and one of those rules of improv that I love, that I always try and encourage people to use, is that yes and method, especially when
Absolutely.
you're leading and working with other people, is to not and this, you know, this is just my very blunt way of saying things. Sometimes I'm like, don't be a point shitter. Like, don't don't just shit on somebody's point for the sake of doing it. Like, try and build on somebody's idea, and expand on what somebody is saying, rather than just shoot them down and say, you know, no, that's not the way it goes.
Mhm.
So more yes and less yeah but.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because yeah, but it's just a dressed up no.
Yeah, it certainly is. Um, so what are when it comes to like communication styles? So one of the things that has changed and evolved over time for us. So you mentioned a number of different communication methods that have evolved over time. Um, gosh, we're old enough to remember when you had an admin come in to to take your words down and then go write up a memo, which was probably better oftentimes than the manager themselves writing it, because it was funny. My wife and I, we were talking about this the other day, how there are managers that she's worked with in the past, and she's done some admin work in her past, and she's like, oh my gosh, like the way that folks wrote, she's like, our kids write better than them in junior high. Um, which is appalling to me, because like, how do you move into like a manager leader role, and it's very difficult for you to put words together.
Lots of
um,
enablers out there.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said because there were lots of enablers.
Well, this is true, yes. And a lot of folks just kind of got a pass on things.
Absolutely.
And there's that is a whole other
Yeah,
conversation.
that's exactly where I was like, okay, reel it back in, reel it back in.
But anyway, so we've seen things move from as you mentioned, BlackBerry to text messaging, and it seems like now we've fallen into this way of communicating that is very brief. And I mean, there's a reason that Twitter got invented and became a thing, is because people were looking for bite-sized bits of communication. We learned to shorten the way that we communicate, use different characters, different words. Now we're just using emojis sometimes to communicate things. And in fact, I was actually reading a while back of a lawsuit in Japan where an emoji was misconstrued on a contract negotiation, and in the courts of Japan, the emoji was held up as a legal method of communication that meant that the person on the opposing side of this contract had to uphold what was being communicated through text and emojis.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we're at. so so what we are kind of in the midst of an evolution here is realizing that there's multiple methods and ways in which to communicate. And there are two arguments to this. There is one argument that says, uh, regardless of uh, regardless of the word usage, the spelling, the word tense, that's not something that you should be critical of. You should be more critical of the idea. And as somebody who reads and writes a lot of papers, I find that to be just terrible, especially like in business. It's like I can't. I mean, I still punctuate my text messages.
So do I.
um, but so I don't know how to, and I don't know if you've had any experience with this, but how do we get younger folks to value that art of communication, to step it up and not kind of take this attitude of, well, that's just who I am, and so if we're going to be this diverse society, you got to just take me for who I am. Which, not saying I don't, but there's other things that we need to kind of bring up as kind of the status quo or the norm.
Well, I think it is number one, what do you want to do with your life, right? So there's going to be some roles where proper grammar and written and oral communication are going to be much more critical, right? So the first question is, what do you want to do and how critical is it? Secondly, then it becomes, okay, in every business world, um, there's always this role of the age of people, right? You've got older people aging out, you've got younger people going in, you're probably thicker in the middle, right? And shifting. And so the norms of the culture you are in also to some extent kind of dictates what's expected here. And I think if you're younger, you have the ability to impact what the norms are, but you also have to understand the existing system enough to be able to articulate why different ways could be better, faster, um, more beneficial, right? You almost have to become a small part of the system to be able to influence it. I don't think in anything, because I said so and because it's just who I am, is going to have the greatest overall impact.
Yeah. And one of the things that I often talk about, I teach a lot of business classes, is the wonderful thing about the world in itself, but in particular, I think our country, is that anybody can be anything that they want, and you can choose to be, you can choose to be who you want to be, right? And you can have that attitude, by the way, of this is who I am, take it or leave it.
Yep.
That's wonderful. But you also have to be open to the fact that the other person can indeed take it or leave it.
I
and
used
that,
to tell my teams when I was talking to them about, especially, again, leading people younger in their careers. And I used to tell them always that you have options. Some of the options are career limiting, but they're options nonetheless.
yeah,
So you can choose to go down that path. It's probably not going to be very successful.
yeah. And especially, I think if you're a salesperson, you have to really be open to a lot of ways in which people will respond to you, and and you can either take great offense to something that somebody says, and I mean, we're talking I'm not talking about things that are actually offensive. I'm
Right.
talking about, somebody being curt, or not being open to something that you're presenting, or, like, um, this is not truly just offensive things. And oh, by the way, sometimes people do say very offensive things, but that's not because they intend for them to be offensive.
Right.
It's kind of, just the manner in which they communicate. I think a great example of that, and we hear this a lot, is, and I'm sorry, folks in the Northeast, for putting this out there, but it isn't anything that you haven't heard before. But you'll sometimes hear that, oh, people from New York, they're so rude. And people from New York, by the way, they're not rude. They're wonderful, lovely people. I mean, I think some of the best people I know come from, like, those five boroughs of New York. Um, for me, it's not a communication style that is offensive. If you're direct and you're upfront and you don't mince words, and by the way, Boston is another great city known for this. Philadelphia, another great city known for this. Um, it doesn't that the style and the words used and even the force of those words are not anything that really deters me,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to kind of look beyond the tone and the inflection and sometimes even the words used, and see the behavior and the context. And is this truly somebody trying to offend you, or is this just their style?
Well, and I think of, you talked about selling, which, selling is all about them, not about you. So if I was going to be, this is the way I communicate as a salesperson, and Mr. Customer, you either like it or you don't, I'm probably not going to be very successful salesperson. I need to understand the age of the person I'm dealing with. I need to understand the dynamics of their business. I need to understand their culture. I know um, I managed a young Asian man in San Francisco. And when we would call on other Asian clientele, I knew Asian customers, even though I was the boss, they expected him to take the lead, not me. And because I was so much taller than my rep, as well as many of the customers, the first thing I did as soon as I could get in quickly was sit down. So I wasn't looking down at anybody.
Yeah,
And
and it is amazing to me, when you talk about that. There are different kind of role expectations that happen in communication and conversation. Those things change by culture. And
absolutely.
one of the things that I learned over the course of many years is that there are cultures in Asia as well as the Middle East where eye contact is not perceived as one of those things that somebody is listening to you. So here in the United States, when you're talking with someone, the expectation is you're going to look them in the eye.
Yes.
Um, in other cultures, that's actually a sign of disrespect to
Right.
look somebody speaking to you, especially if they're of authority, in the eye. And so if you don't have that kind of cultural awareness to you to understand that there are parts of the world where the polite and proper thing is to actually look down as opposed to looking someone in the eye, you're going to bring in your own kind of thoughts, feelings, and opinions about that, and have the potential of creating some offense in your own regard. So when you're calling on customers, and if you don't understand these things, and this is again being in a country like the United States, which is a draw of cultures of people from around the world, you got to kind of sharpen your blade when it comes to these things, because there are so many different ways to communicate and speak to others.
Yeah, you've got to have the ability to learn and flex. And like I said, it's different on different roles that you choose. But if you choose a sales job, you better bet that you look at things differently based on who I'm working with. As a speaker, I have to think about my audiences differently. One of the things that I do is I talk to my client close to the event and get an idea of, okay, you said there were going to be this many people. How many people are actually going to be there? And then I talk to them, confirm maybe the age. I remember it was my first big conference. I was the closer for the day. And as we were talking, I identified that the average age of the person in the audience was much younger than who I had typically talked to with this specific speech. So that night I went through and I edited a lot of my reference points to be younger. So for example, I used to talk about being a sales rep, carrying an extra set of pantyhose in my glove compartment in case my pantyhose ran. Well, there's a lot of young girls out there that just wouldn't get that, right? Because they don't even wear pantyhose. And so I talked to that and I was like, you wear tights. All they are is thick pantyhose. I made jokes of it, but I had to link when I talk about using the telephone.
Or
and
even
I
this.
say, when people laugh, I was like, I know how old my audience is because I know the ones that get that, the ones that are going, what's she doing?
Right.
But I have to adjust my examples so that they're relevant for the audience.
Yeah, that's true. And I find myself, even when I'm teaching every once in a while, I'll like make a reference to Three's Company, and I got half the audience like, what are you talking about?
Oh my God, you will appreciate this as a college professor. My neighbor across the street, and one of my previous moves was a professor at Emory. And they had this program called Teacher for a Day. And so you could go, he said, do you want to come in and be my teacher for the day? And I was like, sure. He taught decision analysis. And so we were talking about different things at Coca-Cola we could talk about in the class. And I was like, oh, you know what? I'll talk about New Coke. And he said, okay, I'll tell them to research it. And I was like, what do you mean research it? And he goes, Lisa, they weren't born yet. They think New Coke is Coke 2. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I now feel so old.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole generation of people who don't remember Fruitopia. So, but they're nostalgic for Surge, so that's good.
Yeah, there you go.
And by the way, before we wrap things up here, just make a recommendation for folks who are listening. There's a wonderful book that you guys should check out from author by the name of Erin Meyer. It's called The Culture Map. And it is a book that really talks a lot. I actually use this book in classes that I teach around communication. But it teaches you a lot around cultural communication and ways in which you communicate that are different than other societies and cultures around the world. And it's an amazing book just to read, to kind of understand these different cultural perspectives that we have. And the United States, we do have a lot of people that come from many different places, but I think some really great cross-cultural examples happen in Europe because of the close proximity of so many different countries and cultures and communication methods and styles. It's a really fascinating book. So I encourage folks to check that one out because it is a good one. Another book, by the way, and let's give a plug for Lisa Fay because she also has books around communication as well. So Lisa, what are some of the books that you have that might help folks as well?
Sure. So one of my books is called Improve Your Communication, 52 Tips to Accelerate Your Performance, Positioning, and Perception. And it's available on my website at lisafay.com. That's F-E-Y, like Tina Fey, or on Amazon.com. And I also have a book that I co-wrote with another lady called Polishing Your Communication. And that one is targeted towards high school athletes that are trying to be recruited to colleges and universities to play sports. And it talks about how they should look at and consider their communication during that recruiting process to position themselves in the best way possible.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. So yes, we got a couple good books to check out, and if anybody is ever interested in working a little bit more with Lisa, she has a wonderful approach and style to things, and would definitely check out her website and get in touch because there's many things that I think I love. I love following your posts that you put out there. With it hasn't been because of lockdowns and things of that nature. We haven't been in offices as much, but you do a lot of very fun and interesting speaking engagements and work with a lot of very interesting people. So
Thank you. That's a well, the one thing I can guarantee my clients is we're going to have some fun because life is just too short.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, with that, folks, we're going to bring another episode to a close. And next week, we're actually going to be taking a little bit of a break due to the holidays, but we are going to be coming back and courting a couple interesting guests right now. One of which is a presidential researcher and does a lot of work around uh, uh, I'm trying to remember the newsletter, and it's just drawing a blank for me right now, which I always hate when I do that. I should keep notes posted all over here. Um, but anyways, we're going to be talking about the Electoral College and
Oh,
whether or not the Electoral College is still something that serves us well, or if we might be time to think about other ways of doing that. And there's a lot of emotion and a passion around that topic. I totally understand that. I have some of my own beliefs, but after listening to this gentleman, I can certainly understand where this idea and perspective is coming from, and will be an interesting conversation. So I'm trying to get that lined up and going, and we'll definitely have an announcement out when we have that, as well as future shows. So with that, folks, thank you so much for checking us out once again, and I will look forward to talking to you guys next time. Until then, have a good one.
happy Thanksgiving.